place to be. Analyze the players and the team. Keep a great company in the stream.
It's a Murali End. Welcome to the show. We're here when you're high. We're here when you're low. Some days you're happy, some days you wanna when happy. It's we when man, it's them. It's the same place, Murali End. Sri Lanka cricket, we gon' represent. Go tell a friend.
Was it a wide? I think so. What a way to end what has been an up and down World Cup. I'm Dominic Machado. This is the Murali End. Today I'm joined by former Sri Lankan fielding coach Anton Rue, who's generously agreed to be with us this entire World Cup and has been giving us amazing analysis, and by Nick Brooks, Sri Lanka's #1 cricket historian. Guys, for a dead rubber, what a match. Anton, we'll come to you. How do you think the boys did in a dead rubber, in a difficult situation with effectively nothing to play for?
Yeah, well, I thought at one stage when we were fielding, I thought, oh my goodness, here we go again. But credit to the boys, they stuck in. I think they won the last couple of overs from a bowling point of view out in the field. I think Pakistan definitely fell short by a few runs. And then, yeah, what a fight by the boys to get us close. Dasun nearly got the guys over the line there towards the end. And, yeah, that's why the IPL has those, you can go to the third umpire for those wide calls because, these are make and break moments in the match. Imagine if this was a winner takes all to go through to the next round. All of a sudden, that call becomes crucial.
Nick, what did you think? If this is Dasun's last game as captain, last game perhaps in Sri Lankan colors, as many people have been calling for, what kind of legacy does he leave with this match?
I mean, if so, what an incredible way to bow out, right? That was thrilling. At no point did I think we had a game on until that over where Dasun took down Usman Tariq. And then suddenly I was like, here we go. Then I thought it was gone again. It was just fantastic ebb and flow through those last 5 overs. I'm delighted for Dasun. A lot's been said about him in terms of his captaincy, his leadership, his ability over the past few days. Most of it, I think, really unfair. And so for him to come out and show that he's a world-class hitter, fantastic stuff. And I'm delighted for Sri Lanka more generally, just to see fans in the crowd having an amazing time, to see the stadium packed for a dead rubber. There's been so much talk about negativity, about toxicity the past few days. I mean, when you got a crowd like that supporting you, for a game where there's nothing on the line, you have to say that Sri Lanka's cricket culture is fantastic and like nowhere else in the world, right?
Yeah, and we'll.
Sorry to say though.
I was going to say, Estelle, tell us, you were there.
No, it wasn't very supportive during that bowling performance. They were cheering for Pakistan. There were loud cheers for Pakistan, and every time the DJ kept asking, "What do you want? What do you want?" It was. I think people are frustrated, right? And we saw that in the New Zealand game as well. So sadly, that's what it was like today. I mean, it goes both ways, right? People are frustrated. They've seen lots of poor performances. The fact that they turned up was great. But I don't know. I won't justify either thing, but it felt very disappointing to hear. You're playing at home. You have your crowd booing you and hooting at you, and it just doesn't feel good, whether it's justified or not.
Yeah, and we'll talk about sort of what the lead up has been like. I think one thing that should go very clearly said is that what Dasun did in those last couple overs is something that very, very few Sri Lankan batters in the history of the game and certainly right now can do. So I just want to say that people have been doubting Dasun and saying, he's struggling for runs, he's not doing much. But at the end of the day, that's why he's in the team. And usually most teams have 2 or 3 guys who can do that. So you're not a lone ranger. You're not the only one expected to finish the innings. So it was great to see that that fight from him. Especially at a moment that I think he could be at a low. We saw him in the last press conference, really dejected. What do you? I was curious. What do you guys think of some of the decisions made before the game? Obviously, Kusal Mendes was about to make way because of his injury, but bringing in Jonathan Leonage for this final match, they played 6-5. What did you guys make of that decision?
Uh, I think you need 5 frontline bowlers on a pitch like this more than ever. I think we've generally been in favour of 6-5, but I think especially on a good batting pitch, you really need frontline bowlers, and I think you saw how expensive. Sri Lanka had one more bowler, they might have been able to keep it down a little, but I think it was a 200 kind of pitch, right?
Yeah. And what about the decision to chase? I thought that was again another interesting one. Obviously, there's some comfort in chasing, but for Pakistan, you would have been pretty glad to hear that you get to set a score and you don't have to chase down something in like 12 overs.
That, I think, Tom, it's like this. I think for Sri Lanka going into this game, they don't need to be thinking about who's qualifying for the semis, right? Like, it doesn't matter to them. They are not making the semis. So their decision should, and I think was based on what's the best plan for us. How do we win this game? And I felt like, given the fact that, there was no rain around, unlike the England game, before the England game, and Sri Lanka had chased well against Australia, they felt that that was the best option, chase on this pitch, because it looked like a flat track. So I know a lot of people were questioning, oh, look, if you want Pakistan to qualify, then this is the best way. This is the easier option for them, to give them to set a target and then get Sri Lanka bowled out. But I think from Sri Lanka's point of view, it doesn't matter to them unless you're thinking about the, who's hosting the match. As a team, it does not matter to them who makes it to the semis, right? So they would have been looking at how do we win this game, and I think that decision was based on that.
Yeah, couple of interesting performances today that I want to talk about. So one, I'll start with the batting first. What did you guys make of Pawan Ratnayaka's innings and what he's shown over this World Cup? Because I think this is one of the big questions that has come up: is what do we think of him as a player and how he played, his technique, how transferable is it? Anton, what have you made of Pawan as that number 4 for SLC?
I think he's been, I think I heard one of the commentators say the find of the tournament for Sri Lanka. I probably wouldn't go that far. I'd probably say that he's been a silver lining in a very dark tunnel for us. Absolutely, he's been a young guy that's come in. He's added an extra bit of energy within the fielding setup. So he's very energetic in the field. He's throwing himself around. I think he reads the game quite well. He's a guy that sort of times his innings, and he has sort of shown that he can go through the gears. He's not afraid to take on the boundary. He can clear the fence. I think he's a way more clever cricketer than what we think and what we expect. So from that sense, I think he's definitely something for the future. It's now all about finding a few people that we can fit around him. Like who can support a guy like that. Because what you don't want is for a guy like him coming in and having to play completely against what his normal T20 blueprint is all about. And I think with the frailties that has been shown with the Sri Lankan batting lineup, sometimes that's been the case. And as soon as he moves away from his blueprint, that's sort of where he gets unstuck. But you know what? You can say that about most young international batters that have come onto the scene. And I'm sure he'll take a lot, from this tournament, and hopefully he just keeps growing from this, because he's definitely put up his hand and said, "Hey, I want to stick around for a little bit longer."
Yeah,
I see him as, if I can just jump in, like someone like Harshita Samaravikram is very similar in that they seem to know what their strengths are, right? Pawan, from what we've seen of him so far, apart from a couple of those innings where either he went too hard or didn't show any intent at all, it feels like when he's batted well, he's batted to his strengths. Like he's not tried to do anything, that doesn't suit his game. So in that way, I feel like he's the parallel I would draw with Harshita is that she's also similar, right? She's not a power hitter. She can't clear the boundary very easily, but she's figured out how she gets runs, right? So I think that is a really valuable asset for a player to have, because you can very often get stuck in the, okay, we have to go hard, so I have to chase
Mhm.
the sixers, instead of trying to find a way that you can find runs quickly without playing shots that are not like in your game, right?
Yeah. I think one thing that's interesting is he did hit 3 6s and they looked good. They all looked good, but he picked his spot for when to go with it. And this made me think, and I was curious your impression of this, Anton. Um, we talked about the many different meanings of intent, right? That can mean many different things. And I was thinking in particular about the meaning of intent that means how you start your innings, right? Obviously, some guys feel very comfortable hitting from the word go, but is intent in those, say, first 10 balls an attitude thing or a technical thing, in your opinion? Because I think it's a tricky question, but I've been thinking about it a lot and wanted to get your thoughts.
No, I think it's a great discussion point that you bring up, and it's something that I think coaches around the world have, dealt with within their various teams. I think if you had to rephrase it in terms of the interpretation of what intent means is the most important. It's how your players interpret what you mean by intent, and ultimately, in my opinion, I believe that intent has to show its form in your movement. So if you're thinking about scoring, if you're thinking about being positive, hopefully that's going to translate in you moving better towards the ball, further away from the ball, inside the line, whatever. But you cannot just be standing still and hoping for a bowler to give you a bad ball, because if you're going to be playing against some of the world's best, they're not going to give you any bad balls. So in that sense, your intent then gets you to move better, and by moving better, your natural skill will take over, and then you'll be able to put away the bad ball. And once you put away the bad ball, you start getting the bowler off his length, and then you can start playing the bowlers versus batter game. So for me, there's 2 points. How you interpret intent is extremely important, because some batters interpret it by saying, okay, you've given me license, I can just go out there and throw the kitchen sink at it. Their movement is all over the place. They choose the wrong balls to hit, and it's drama. Okay, and the other one is your intent has to showcase itself through movement, and by movement I mean being positive into the ball or further away from the ball.
Yeah, I think that movement as intent is what you see from Pavan. He gets himself in the position he wants to be in to hit the shot he wants to hit.
Correct.
Yeah, I think throughout the tournament he's looked really positive without being reckless. He's got an unusual technique, right? The split grip with the bottom hand so low. But I just felt that he's been positive and definite about what he wants to do throughout. And he swept really well against the spinners today, right? And I think playing high quality spin we saw against Abra is a real issue for this group in general.
Yeah, I was going to say 2 guys who looked good early were Kamil Mishara and Chara Thessalanka. And I think they've both been players who have been slightly disappointing. And I mean this in the sense of we wanted big performances from them, but we couldn't get it. But we also saw, especially I think with Mishara's little cameo up top, just how talented a player he is. And to my mind, it kind of sheds light on the mistake that Sri Lanka made by not backing him throughout the tournament, right? Imagine if he hadn't been yo-yoed in and out of the squad for the last 3 games. And I think that speaks to one of the big issues that, and same thing with Thessalanka, right? He only played the last 2 games. What happens if you put faith in these guys and give them 10, 12 games and say, this is what I want you to do, this is how I want you to play?
I think that's where your long-term planning comes into play. I think that's where your backing, players have always said, does my coach back me, or does the system back me? Like, what does backing mean? Well, backing means that you give a guy enough opportunities in a calendar year to showcase what he's about in that specific role that you want him to play. Don't ask him to open the batting, then bat 3, then bat 4, then bat 6, then he doesn't play, then he's dropped, then he's in, then he's out. All that creates uncertainty, and what you see then is the lack of intent, because the guy's literally shitting himself, excuse my French, when he goes into bat. And then you see that he's not moving, he's not doing anything, or the conversely, he's doing everything that you don't want him to do. So I agree with you 100%. It's when you decide this is the blueprint that I want us to play from a batting perspective. These are the guys that are best suited for that blueprint. Okay, so these are your openers. These is my number 3. This is my number 4, and then these are the guys that we're going to bat around them. Let's give them a calendar year to showcase what they've got. And in that calendar, you can also upskill them. They can also look back at their games and start working out what they need to work on. It all sort of comes together, doesn't it, Dom? So I was a little bit disappointed of the toing and froing within a tournament. But, those are things that the selectors and coaches have to live and die with.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it also gets at, and I'm curious to hear Nick's opinion on this, there's been a lot of discourse in the media about how this is a low point for Sri Lanka cricket, that this is, the lowest point they've ever been. And as someone who has charted the full history of Sri Lanka cricket, I'm curious your thoughts on that, because I feel like I have some strong feelings, but I'd like to hear from the actual historian first.
Yeah, I think that's a massive hyperbole and a huge stretch to say it's the lowest ebb for Sri Lanka cricket. I think we'll look back on this tournament and see it as a massive missed opportunity. Because I think Sri Lanka had a really good shot to make the semi-finals here. I don't think New Zealand, England, or Pakistan are massively better than this side. And to touch on Anton's point, I think the biggest change I'd like to see moving forward, alongside giving these guys better batting pitches to play on, is more continuity. We're not quite at, 2017 levels where there were 50 players picked in a year, but it seems like we're not far off that. But no, I'd say it's a long way from the lowest ebb, Dom. I think in that 17, 18, 19, 20 era, the team was much, much worse. You go back to not that long before Sri Lanka won the 96 World Cup. I think the start of 1994, they went to India, lost 3 test spine innings, and then lost 2 test spine innings against Pakistan at home. So there have been plenty of bad days, and the night has often been darkest before the dawn. I think this team is not far away from being good, and I back these players. I just think that just something has to happen to kind of springboard this team to get to where it should be, consistent performances.
I was thinking about it last night, maybe even the night before. I don't quite really think that Sri Lankan fans know how good they've had it, right? In terms of, if you think about how difficult it is to win a World Cup. I mean, South Africa hasn't won one yet, ever, right? They've only won a World Test Championship, and the World Test Championship's only been going for three cycles, right? But if you talk about how much planning and how much luck and how much effort goes into A, making a final, and B, winning it, Sri Lanka have had it unbelievably well in the past, right? So in the greatest scheme of things, you guys should be happy nonetheless. Now, of course, we all want to win. We get that. Absolutely. But the truth is that at the moment, Sri Lanka is not what it used to be in terms of the generational talent that they have. But in terms of how they've performed in World Cups and how they've done winning trophies around the world, they've done, some might say you've actually surpassed what you're supposed to be doing out in the cricket in the cricket world. All right. So these things do ebb and flow. Even Australia went through a long period before their greatness and post their greatness. So all these things ebb and flow. And I think if you had to take in Sri Lanka's cricket history and put it all into one hat, I think everyone's got something to be very proud of. And like I said, tried to say the other night around, the sense of belonging and those guys should be together with the new generations and trying to raise them instead of everyone pushing them down and saying, look, you're not as good as the 2000s. You're not as good as the 96. We need to just stick together a little bit and help the new generations come through, because other teams are way more well-funded. Other teams are way more well-coached. Other teams have a larger group of players that are coming through the system. So already in that sense, Sri Lanka is a little bit behind. So, give the guys a little bit of credit. And I think they like Nick said, I think there's still a hell of a lot to look forward to, and that's what should excite us.
I was going to say, I want to...
Yeah, there's nothing...
Go, Estelle,
Sorry,
go for it.
Yeah, what I was going to say is there's nothing to... Sri Lanka have won all these competitions and had all this success, right, in the past. But we don't really know whether that same team would have been successful in this era, right? So it feels very, I mean, it feels very unfair to compare because the game has moved forward so much, right? As Sangha pointed out on Twitter after that loss against New Zealand, the game has moved forward. And Sri Lanka have fallen back because of some of the policies and some of the ways systems have been run within the country, right? Whereas in the past, like talent was getting you at least to like the 70-80% of where you need to compete. And then of course you have like the Sangas, Mahelas, Muralis who are Sanats who are special talents, who are getting you the rest of the way there. But if you look at it now, talent alone is not going to get you to that level, right? Because everyone is talented. You'll have 100 kids who are as talented as Virat Kohli or Rohit Sharma, who probably don't make the Indian team at all ever, right? So talent is something that in the past would have got you very far in the sport, but as the game becomes more professional, it's difficult to it's difficult to make it on talent alone. So you need to have the systems in place. You need to have the resources, as Anton mentioned, right? How other countries have better resources than Sri Lanka in some areas, right? So you need to get those in place if you want to actually compare. It's very difficult to compare eras because the sport has moved on so much.
Yeah.
I also think we need to state, right, there's no real analyst in this squad, right? Not someone who does that as a professional thing, right? So the planning and the tactics, as we said, have been poor. The coaching has been subpar, and they've changed coaches so much. Like I was thinking the other day, they hired Julian Wood as a power hitting coach. I haven't heard a thing about him after they hired Vikram Rathore, like, maybe a month or two after Julian Wood was hired. And to me, I look at this squad and I see tons of young talent and players who have achieved, and they've achieved it despite a system that has slowed them down at every stage, right? You see these guys go and play, whether it's in the IPL or whether it's in the ILT20 or the SAT20, and they perform. And then they come back and they play a different way when they come home, right? Our successes are in spite of the system. Our players' successes are in spite of the system. And I feel like it's our duty as a nation to give them the chances to succeed, to give them the infrastructure to succeed, rather than attack them and say, oh, well, they're not good enough, they haven't done this, they haven't done that. It's very frustrating for me because I think the players are feeling hurt, they're frustrated, they wish they had more positive things coming around them, but I think they have been failed by the management continuously. And I really do believe that with the proper support, they can do well and they can thrive. And two things I'll point out. There has been no LPL for how many years now, right? And the last time there was an LPL, Patham Nissanka was not drafted in it, right? How are you supposed to succeed when you're not playing high-level T20 cricket at home? And we'll throw on the pitches, right? You saw how they can play on a good pitch. Why not give them the opportunity to learn that, to develop that, rather than relying on these pitches that have huge boundaries, that spin square for anybody, right? And it's just been a poor setup. And for me, it's got to be take that step back, have that plan for the next 5, 6, 7 years, and move forward confidently, knowing that you've got a serious pool of talent here that, if used properly, can blossom into a world-beating team.
Yeah, just to add something on the resources, this is why it really annoys me when like Sri Lanka cricket say they have a profit, like when they give out the financials and they say they have made this much amount of profit and they're richer than this board, and that money should all be going into the resources, right? What's the point of having a profit if you are not giving the resources needed at the lower levels, right? There's no point in it because you're making money to build the sport, right? That's what you're making money for.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the Australian model, that they've got a cricketers players model that the more money they make out of the game, so the more the the better they do at sport, the more money they're going to make, but the more money they also have to reinvest back into grassroots cricket. That's the deal that they signed. And the other day I mentioned that Sri Lanka doesn't even have a players association whatsoever. So how are they even part of a conversation of where this money eventually gets reinvested to? These players don't have any say, so you're at the mercy of whoever's in charge of the Cricket Association at the time. And where does the accountability lie as to where that money goes or does not go? And I think that is a question mark that every single Sri Lankan fan should be asking at this point in time, rather than pointing fingers at the team on the field, because they are a result of that.
Yeah, and Delaney is pointing out what they often say about in comparison to New Zealand, right? Yet New Zealand run a good competitive domestic system, right? At every single level, they have players like we saw Cole McConkey, right, come into the squad ready to perform, right, rather than having a huge gap. And unless we actually use those resources to invest in something that's going to create players for the future, it's going to be more and more days like this.
And now they're talking about like IPL investment in the Super Smash, right? That would it's not going to happen in Sri Lanka because it's not a viable product. And I mean, something like the indoor center at Premadasa that they just finished, they started working on that like in the early 2000s. Siddharth Wetamuni said that when he was on the board, they wanted to do it. It got stopped. It gets started. Like shit just takes so long to get sorted. I mean, how can you run a system like that?
Anton, we can ask you this question because I know you worked at the HPC. Mudita asks, what is the role of the High Performance Center?
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky enough to be there when Tim McCaskill was basically in charge of the High Performance Center, and I can tell you that he knew more about kids playing for a club team out in the sticks or where it is than anyone that I've come across in my time over there. So from a High Performance Center, in my opinion, it's about identifying who your players are that are of interest to whatever standard of cricket team you're picking. So from your national team to your A team, your under-19s, maybe even a team in between to that. You've got your women's cricket that falls under that as well, and of course your under-19s. And through that, you've got to bring them in. You've got to try and condition them according to the Sri Lankan national standards. You've got to give them access to national team coaches so that they can figure out, for themselves and be exposed to how things are done at that sort of level. And of course, the big thing for me is, again, these are just my opinions, is that your High Performance Center should have the best facilities in the country, so that when players come there, they're training on number one wickets, they're practicing on awesome facilities, so that they can expand their games from that. Now, at times, I definitely saw that at the High Performance Center. At times, I definitely did not see it because of, whether it is weather, where there's a little bit of lack of planning, whether it is there was too many people there at one stage, because at one stage we would, it felt like, especially in the beginning, it felt like there were so many people there. We were trying to, spread the net so far to try and catch as many people as we could, when actually it should be the other way around. It should be very focused into certain individuals or certain teams that come through, so that you can continually work with these guys over a sustained period of time, so that you can monitor their growth. That's what I see the role of a High Performance Center is. And then specifically for a national team, it's all about, some guys don't play Test cricket, some guys only play white ball cricket, and the other way around. So those guys should be training at the High Performance Center prior to series, and only get released to their clubs if it falls in with their training management load. But again, that's another talking point, and I know I'm going on here, but this is what I felt as a coach when I was working there, is that these guys were being pulled, the players themselves were being pulled left, right, and center. On Monday, they would have to play for their club. On Thursday, there was a mercantile match. Then they're supposed to train on all those days as well, and then get picked for the Sri Lankan team that's playing a series the following week. Like, there's only so much a guy can do, right? So what is the role of High Performance Center? The High Performance Center says, listen, player X is of Sri Lankan, either he's contracted with Sri Lanka or he's going to be picked very soon for Sri Lankan team. So until that time, he stays at the high performance center. He lives, he eats, and he trains. He's bottom off all the time with us, and he will only get released if A, he's not picked for Sri Lanka, or B, we don't need him and he goes back into his club system. That's what I see what the high performance center's role is.
I want to follow up with some thoughts here, and I'm curious, Nick and Estelle here. Anton has described how much workload, right, is on these players. And I think it's also true with the coaches, right? Because what happens when you're trying to coach one-day matches, right? Like against England, we had a one-day series against England, 3 weeks out from a World Cup, right? Test matches. Should Sri Lanka, especially in the white ball game, invest in a white ball only coach? Someone who can focus on, these are the types of players I want, these are the types of skill sets that we need to develop, and have a very particular kind of idea about that. Do you think the one coach model works, or do you think we should go with multiple coaches?
I don't have a strong opinion either way. I guess my only comment would be Sri Lanka plays so little Test cricket, right? Like, is it viable for there to be a coach specifically for the Test setup? I do think they need a central voice in the white ball setup who has more modern experience than Sanath. I think the game has really changed since he played, and I haven't seen a sense from him that he is evolving with cricket.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Nick. It's just we don't play Test cricket like in England or Australia, right? So is it viable to have someone separately for like 4 tests a year? But I do think it might be valuable in the sense that we do have so many players who are format specific, right? Who don't play all 3 formats or who play only 1 or 2. So in that sense, it might be useful to have specialist coaches in terms of, like, I would say, like if you can't have head coaches for the 3 different formats, maybe you have like in the high performance center, someone who will focus on the test bowlers, right? Something like that, so that those players also get that specialized training. Because I mean, I completely agree with the Sanath point. I don't think there's any anything to say that he should be in a coaching position, whether as a team manager or like some kind of head of cricket, I don't know. But in a coaching position, I don't know whether there's anything to really back up that decision to give it to him, right? So you need people who are in touch with the game and who are moving with the modern game, right? And that's why I know we don't always talk about qualifications and stuff, but sometimes those things are important because it's a learning that is in an evolving space, right? And it's evolving very quickly. What you did 3 years ago might not be relevant now. I mean, you guys remember that the matchups, right? It was such a big deal, like 4-5 years ago. Now you
Asia
hardly
Cup,
get to see it,
yeah.
right? Asia
Kind of
Cup,
gone out of the
Asia
game
Cup,
completely.
Yeah. And I remember there was an IPL when who was the batter? I can't remember. He didn't, like the premier batter didn't come out to bat because a leg spinner was bowling and he was a right-hander. Like, because matchups was such a big, like a component of analytics at that point. It worked, and then like slowly the game evolved, batters evolved, things have changed, right? So you need to be someone who is in that coaching space, who will be able to move with those trends, instead of somebody who is not really, does not really have those resources to pull from.
And I want to ask Anton this because he's been in the T20 only setup, whether it's with various IPL teams and things like that, and on a national team setup. What do you see? How, if you're SLC, do you manage the difference, right? Because if you're in a T20 setup, you can focus on very specific skills, right? But if you have to jump from format to format, how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I think so. I was part of the Proteas setup with white ball only. So at the time, they had a split coaching role, and obviously they won the World Chess Championship and they got into the final of the the T20 World Cup, the last one in West Indies, I think it was, was it in India? No, it was against
Yeah.
against India at the West Indies. So it can definitely work, but I think from that perspective, you also have to find two coaches that are not of the, they don't have massive egos. I think that's important, so that you don't split the dressing room in half, guys listening to this guy instead of that guy. So I think that's very important. And then you also have to look at your playing staff per se, to figure out, do they have the emotional intelligence to understand that they've actually got two coaches working on their game in two different or three different formats. So you've got to take those things into account as well. I don't think it is that easy to say, okay, we're going to go with a red ball coach and a white ball coach. Some of the stuff that I really had trouble with as bowling coach of the South African side with the white ball team was my contact time with the players was extremely low. Yes, we played slightly more Test cricket than Sri Lanka at that time. But, these guys, they go from a Test match straight into a white ball series, or vice versa. They go from a white ball series straight into a Test match, and then straight after that, they go back to their provincial setups and so forth. So the contact time that you had with these players was, I would say, a week at best. And most of the times during that week, as a coach, you would then have to find out or figure out, okay, where's this guy's playing workload at? Are we actually going to taper him off slightly before we enter the series to look after his bodies type of thing? So there's no time to really work on skills. There's no time to really prepare for the series. It was literally just, you're flying in, you get busy, you get stuck in, you make sure that everyone's sort of fit and ready to go, and then the series starts. And I think what you've seen from most teams around the world now, they've all started slightly going back to a singular coach, purely because I think your contact time with those players is slightly more than when you have the split role. Unless you've got three different teams that are playing in, for your three different formats, that most of the guys are staying at home before they go on tour, then I think it can work. But if your contact time is low with the players, I think the one coach strategy, I think, is the way moving forward. And I think it's showed with a lot of teams having moved back to that model.
I want to now think a little bit about the cultural side of this, right? So Dilani asks about how Sri Lankan culture runs on shame and fear, and how that may sort of go up the chain when SLC takes decisions. And I think I would add one other characteristic. So there's fear, there's shame, but there's also a massive culture of respect and respect for one's elders. So again, I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on that, because you all have various experiences with how that culture shapes decision making at SLC.
For me as an outsider, I think the respect for elders and the seniority thing is the biggest issue and the biggest barrier. I sort of repeatedly got the sense from my personal experiences and from what I read about what happens at SLC and what I spoke to people about, that the attitude is generally, I'm older than you, I've been around longer, so I know better. I think that's a real problem and has been repeatedly. It's not a new thing at all. I think the fear of failure is also an issue, and that we've seen kind of repeatedly that like rabbit in the headlights sense that when things are going wrong, there doesn't seem to be that kind of like stand up and fix it. It seems that panic sets in and the perahera starts. I don't quite know where that comes from, but I do feel like Sri Lanka handle pressure not necessarily as well as other teams at time, and that's something that needs to be addressed. I don't know quite how.
Stell, you can go, and then I'll cover anything that you haven't mentioned.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to address that question. I know I'm the only one who lives here, so I probably should have a better answer than that. But we spoke about like how the outside seems to influence a lot of the decisions, right? In the previous podcast as well, about how like there is no conviction in some of the decisions that have been made. And that's one of the problems I see certainly in this setup, is that if you don't buy in to what you're trying to do, it's very difficult to actually do it, right? So if you don't buy into the type of cricket you want to play, whether it's aggressive cricket, like I would take like baseball as an example. I know people made fun of it, and it failed in the Ashes and all of that. But I think given the team that England had, that buy-in about playing cricket in that way is what in some instances brought them success, right? Like if you say man to man, if you compare England test team to an Australian test team when this baseball era started, probably they wouldn't match up man to man on paper, but they were able to compete maybe because they all bought into that idea. So I feel like that is one big thing that's lacking in Sri Lanka at the moment, is that there is no buy-in to any kind of strategy like that we see out there, whether it's the 7-4 or the 6-5, or whether it's the playing, two fast bowling all rounders, or whether it's opening with Kusala and Patum, or changing that up. I feel like there is no real conviction, and that's why we keep seeing things changing. I don't know whether it's about sheer shame or fear, but certainly, as Nick mentioned, the fear of failure is there. Confidence is a big thing, I think. If you look at the Sri Lankan team, we can see it from players like Kamil, right? The moment he got dropped, it felt like he turned into a different player, right, when he came back. And today, once again, like it was like he was, nothing to lose. He's just going to go after the bowling. So there are a lot of issues like that. I don't know if you can really kind of pull into the shame and fear or things like that, but certainly the idea that things are so influenced by outside noise is a big problem, I feel, for the team.
Yeah, Dom, I could probably write a book about this. And I've just quietly sitting and going through some of the stuff that I've seen and heard on social media, even on the television in the last couple of days. I think Sri Lanka, and I mean this with utmost respect, guys, and please stop me if you this is a debate, okay? So if you don't believe what I'm saying, you can raise your hand. You can stop me at any time. I just feel that when things are going well for Sri Lanka cricket, everyone's on board, and that's cool. But that's the easy thing to do, right? It's when the poo hits the fan, you start seeing everyone's fighting for a little piece or trying to cause some sort of controversy, and that sort of spreads all over. And that's why you start seeing all these hasty decisions being made. Now, there's a few things that Estelle mentioned there about baseball, but I can tell you in the midst of that Ashes breakdown, who were the two people that stood up and took interviews during that period? Brendan McCullum and Key. Rob Key stood there and they took it to the chin. Nasser Hussain, one of Rob Key's good friends, was grilling him live on TV, asking him what's going on, this, that. These two guys fronted up for what they believe in because they were the leaders of the team. I haven't seen that once in the last couple of days. In fact, all I've seen is them just one by one sending players to the slaughter, and hopefully they say something stupid, and then that becomes a headline, and it sort of detracts the focus point on what's actually supposed to be the manager, the head coach, the selector's job to front up and say, hey, things have not worked out, but this was our plan, and we'll stand by it and we'll live by it, right? The next point that I want to make is that I think the ex-players have a huge responsibility to play in this, because a lot of them come out of the woodwork when things don't go well in Sri Lanka. Now, whether that's online or whether that's through an interview or whatever the case may be, but you must remember, these guys, they're almost like Instagram influencers, right? So whatever they say, people listen to that. And I've hardly heard, Estelle, you guys will know better than me, but show me someone who's actually come out and said something positive about the team. Show me someone who's actually said something positive about where the cricket in the country is going. Every single thing that I read and that I hear and that I see is extremely, extremely negative. Now, yes, everyone's allowed their opinion. I get that. But as an ex-player who holds a huge, huge amount of responsibility in the narrative that gets sown around Sri Lankan cricket, I think you guys should think a little bit twice before you start saying some stuff. And if you are that strongly opinioned, then get your bum off your seat, get yourself into the hot seat of Sri Lanka cricket, become head coach, become a head coach of the A team, become a head coach of the under-19 team, become the head selector or whatever it is. Put your name on the sheet, and let's see if you can make a change. That's what I would say. It's easy to
Sorry,
support.
guys, I gotta run.
See you, Estelle.
It's easy to support a team when you're winning. But for me, I've seen the true colors of a lot of people and the state of the cricket in the country. When things go bad, everyone's trying to find someone to blame. And I think that's a natural response. Don't get me wrong. But that is where the big boys that have been there and done that, they need to stand up and be pillars of a good example of, hey, just keep things calm. We've been players. We've been through this before. Things need to improve a little bit in the setup, but there are a lot of positives. Instead of adding flames and fuel to the fire. Those are my 2 points that I'd like to make about that.
I just want to double down on the facing the media, right? I think Sanath absolutely has to face the media head on.
It's too late now.
It's too late now. Right. But he never came out. Right. Who came to the press conference? Rene Ferdinands, right, in the press conference before this match. And he sends out his players, his batting coaches. That's absolutely unacceptable. I don't know any other team sport where the head coach wouldn't be expected to go out and face the media after a match. Right. That and even in cricket, generally, that's the case. So I think that is not okay. It's disgraceful. And I think on top of that, as you said, Anton, we've seen low days in Sri Lankan cricket for a long time, and piling on doesn't help. And it's piling on the players. It's never, the coaching setup did poorly, or the tactics were poor, or they really could use an analyst. It's always, this player has this weakness. And that's the easiest thing to pick up on. This player can't do this. This player can't do that. And I really think that if they are invested in Sri Lanka cricket getting better, and I'll put out a plea. Kumar Sangakkara, you have been involved with one of the most elite T20 franchises. You clearly have scouted a lot of Sri Lankan players. We could use your help. We could use your insight into how to take this team and use its talents and develop. And I think there's no finer example in Sri Lanka cricket of a guy adapting to the white ball game over the course of his career. He was a very limited white ball player when he started his career. He became a great by the end. His advice, his support would mean the world to these guys, right? But then they hear themselves being criticized. And I get, as a commentator, you have to try to be fair, but you also have to be tough on the coaching setup. And again, I as a fan of many other sports, it's something that's very surprising to not hear the coach openly talked about on by commentators, or come to a press conference or anything like that.
Look, I'll go as far as to say that it's not your job as a commentator to discuss how good or bad a player is. Your job as a commentator is to commentate on the game. Because I've seen too many times firsthand the words that come out of commentators' mouth always reaches the player. Always. And then in 2 or 3 months' time, that same guy is sitting in the change room and is a mentor of the team, or is, now helping the guys get better. And you as a player saying, well, 2 or 3 months ago, you told me on air in front of millions that I couldn't play. So imagine that setup. Imagine that dynamic that you create as a player and as a coach. So I'm of a huge, and I'll stand by this until the day I die, is that as a commentator, your job is not to create a job for yourself in cricket. Because if you want to, then put the microphone down and come and coach. Your job is to commentate on the game. Tell us what's going on in the game. What is the captain thinking? Who they're going to bring onto bowl? What's the batsman thinking at this point in time? How can he go about scoring runs, whatever the case may be? But your job should not be sitting there slating the cricketers whatsoever, because you don't understand what it's like to be a player in that position, and someone of your ilk, of that stature, is telling you that you can't play. That's damaging, because you don't have to spend any time with that guy afterwards. So your words just flow out there very easily out of your mouth, no consequences whatsoever. But that player, straight after the series, after the World Cup, has to come back into our setup from a coach's perspective, and we've got to pick up that guy. It's our responsibility now from what you've created, from what you've said. So again, maybe I'm coming across a little bit too harsh here, but so many times I feel like the commentators, they slip over that line, and that's a dangerous place to be, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it's quite tough. And I think the other thing that's challenging is that, again, because of Sri Lankan culture, these guys have outsized voices. It's not like, if
coming back to what Nick's point was in the beginning. So what happens is, and I'm speaking for Sri Lankan cricket specifically, is that these guys that we even I look up to and idolize and have watched as a youngster playing and in awe of how they go about their cricket. When they go about and they're highly vociferous around how good and how bad, especially how bad things are in the game, and then walk into your environment, immediately the players are on the back foot because they don't know if this guy is here to really help us. Can I approach him? Is the environment safe? What am I going to say to him that's going to make him think differently or better of me? So the whole environment becomes a bit tense. Rather than it should have the almost opposite effect, right? When those guys enter the environment, people should be free. People should think, well, geez, we've got some of the best cricketing minds in the country that we've ever had in this change room. It's going to help us. But so many times I've seen those guys walk in and everyone tenses up because of the respect and the influence that these guys have. If they put one foot wrong, they're going to get criticized, and that could be the end of the guy. And I think that's where the fine balancing act around integrity, about how you approach and carry yourself through the viewers online and on TV, as well as then slipping back into a coaching or a mentor role. It's a very, very fine balance and a thin catwalk to walk as a person.
And I think the other thing I'll just add in is that the pylon when things are bad, it's not as if, they're playing well, let's hype them up and talk about what a good player they are. But things are going badly, and then everyone's out of the woodwork talking about how cricket is rubbish.
And just to go back to that point on leadership and facing the music, when the test team was over for the England series a couple of years ago, we saw Sanath for one press conference, which was when they won at the Oval. The rest of the time, we got a batting coach, whether it was Ian Bell or the fast bowling coach or a very junior player, often who wasn't that adept at communicating in English. And I thought that when Sanath came in, he had the potential to be a really inspirational figure. But I do get the sense that actually he hasn't helped the players to flourish. All the reports that we get are that he rules with a really iron fist, right? But that kind of authoritarian leadership style, I don't think necessarily equates to being a strong leader. And I'm not sure the environment over the past couple of years has been right for players to grow.
Yeah. So there's a couple of interesting things coming up. So notionally, Sri Lanka have a series against Afghanistan in the next week or so, supposed to be held in Dubai and UAE, but I don't think doesn't sound like that's going to happen, given geopolitical circumstances. But if it does happen or they move it to Sri Lanka, I'm curious, if you're playing a T20 series, do you go with the players who have just played and say, all right, we're backing you, we're going to build it? How do you approach it if there's no obvious head coach, because Sanath is notionally stepping down? But how do you face a situation like that where you have a one-off series after a World Cup and then you're going to have 3 months of no cricket?
My initial thought, as soon as you mentioned it, was just, it's too early. It's way too early, because you're not giving these guys any time to decompress, come back down to earth, go and see their families, go and see their loved ones, get back into their sort of own environment and their safe space where they can sort of, reflect on what's just happened in this tournament and take a bit of time off and get away from the noise, so to speak. But here you are, you're going straight back into it, Now, yeah, you can rest a few players, absolutely, but then you're sort of taking away the gloss of the series, aren't you? So yeah, I think it's just it's slightly poor planning, but I think that's the way cricket is going these days, is that, you know, we've got to squeeze in all these series in between events, because if you leave it for any later, then there's the IPL, then there's this coming up and that coming up. So yeah, it's something that you've just got to manage. And as players these days, that's why player management is so important. You've got to, as a coach and as a support staff, you need to have your finger on the pulse every single time with the player to know where he's at mentally, physically, and emotionally, because the last thing you want is to throw a guy out there again when he's not mentally quite there. And I think this tournament has taken a huge toll on a lot of people, and I think they deserve the little bit of downtime just to earth themselves again.
I'd love to see SLC use it as a kind of like testing out possible situation and put planning and I guess pastoral care ahead of profits for a change. I'd love to see, you know, guys like Traveen Matthew, Vishen Halambage, Tharinder Ratnayaka get a chance, and we can see if they sink or swim. I agree with Anton, throwing the players into another series off the back of what's been a pretty emotionally grueling World Cup, which came hot on the heels of 6 games against England. It seems a lot, right? And I'm not sure it serves anyone.
Yeah, and especially without a coach, it kind of worries me. Like, how are you going to approach that? What are the data points that are going to be taken? Yeah, I want to end by kind of thinking about the future of Sri Lanka's T20 squad, right? I think everyone tends to view these moments as big telling moments about how good the team is, the quality of the team is. But the truth is, you're never as good as they say or as bad as they say, right? And I think I'd love to hear both of your opinions about, you're given the keys to this T20 squad. You're thinking about, okay, there's a 2028 World Cup. What's your core look like, and how do you move forward over the next couple years? I'll come to you first, Nick.
I keep saying it after every failed tournament, but I'm very much of the don't throw the baby out with the bathwater approach, right? I think most of these players are in the team for a reason. They got picked because they're the best guys, and I don't think it's the time for wholesale changes. I think if you look at the positives that have emerged through this tournament, Pavan Ratnayaka has to be a big one. I think in Kamil Mashara, the full package isn't there, but you can see the potential for a really promising T20 opener. We've seen the emergence, or the re-emergence rather, of Matisha Patirana and the re-emergence of Dilshan Madhushankar. I still think that Sri Lanka has a good core to build around. I think if we could find a couple of really punchy players in the lower middle order who can do that kind of finishing role better, that would really help. But yeah, I think I'd like to see the squad largely carry on. I'd like to see Sri Lanka get the chance to play on pitches which I think are going to serve them a bit more rather than the classic minefields. But yeah, I'm very much of the opinion that wholesale changes aren't the way to go.
Yeah, I think what sets the T20 schedule different around the ODI and Test schedule is that, you know, it's a World Cup every 2 years.
Yeah.
Right. So for me, there's no sense in rebuilding. And I've mentioned that before in the previous podcast. It's like you need to build on top of what you've got at this point. And coming to Nick's point there is like, absolutely. If you go through all those guys in the side, we've got a very nice core of players that pick themselves and will play any day of the week when it comes to that. That's if they're fit and on the park. So my first point of action is, in these next 2 years or 1.5 years, I will do everything in my power to make sure that those guys are the best conditioned athletes and cricketers that they've ever been when that next World Cup arrives. No question marks, no ifs, no buts. I don't want to see shirts that are bulging. I don't want to see any of that. I want guys coming to that next World Cup having shown that they've put in the work, and people can't point fingers at anyone saying that they are unconditioned. Now, can you still get injured? Absolutely. But will there be questions asked because of that? No, they won't. But there are questions asked about the team right now because physically they're not up to the standard. So that's the number one. Number two is, and I suppose this is coming nicely to my end of what I wanted to say, first of all, on this podcast tonight, is if you take a guy like Dasun, the captain of this team, right? He's the most, correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, he's the most successful T20 captain that Sri Lanka's ever had, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And he showcased again tonight after what has been an unbelievable week for him in terms of his captaincy, his role within the side, his leadership, the flack that he's had to take in front of the press, some of the stuff that he's been said, all the negative attention has been placed on him. For him to take that on board and to go and deliver a performance like that tonight against Pakistan, that shows me two things. One, he's an unbelievable leader that can withstand that amount of abuse, if I may put it that way, to come out then and still put in a performance like that. Are there things that he needs to work on in his game? Absolutely, but so does everyone else. The other point I think that we have to make for Dasun's sake is there's no one else in the Sri Lankan team that can clear the fence like he can. Until there is another person that can do that, then the question comes in, yes, we're going to look to replace a guy like Dasun because of his age or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
But he's not showing any signs of decay in terms of his fitness. He's always available. He's hardly ever injured. All right. I think his role with the ball is going to be slightly diminished, especially if those core guys are back in the side. So then he can focus again on leading the team from a captaincy point of view and focus on clearing the fence as a finisher for us. I think with him as captain, the core of our players, hopefully they fit. We keep them on the park. You've got 2 years or maybe 1.5 years then to figure out what your top three is going to look like. I think your number 4 is settled. Your 5 and 6 is a question mark for me around who that's going to be. And I think your all-rounder and your bowlers sort of pick themselves. So essentially you're looking at about three positions within the batting setup that I think is up for grabs at the moment. And that can easily be rectified in terms of a blueprint that you want to put down. This is how we want to go and play. Where's the next World Cup, guys? Do we know?
Australia, I believe. Australia.
Okay,
and New Zealand.
So
yeah,
you've got to take those conditions into account. So the ball's going to be moving. There's going to be steep bounce at certain places. So you've got to take players that have the natural attributes or abilities to get that sort of stuff out of the wicket, but can also play that from a batting perspective. So again, like I said, there's no need to rebuild. All you need to do now is just keep adding little pieces of the puzzle together because we've got the core is there. The core is there. Now's the time to show backing. Now's the time to keep continuity. Now's the time to get people in and show that we can get these guys better. And my last point that I'll make, and this is towards the players, and I think they've heard me say this before, arrive at the next World Cup having put the work in so that everyone else can see that you are serious about this whole rechange or rebranding or to gain a bit of faith back from the supporters. Come in there looking like absolute beasts because the rest of the world, they look like beasts. So why can't we look like beasts? Okay, so from that perspective, I would challenge them with that, but I think we've got enough to work with for the next cycle, for sure.
Yeah, I want to kind of compliment a lot of what you guys have said. And this question that Z Gold brings up, do we think Sri Lanka have more talent than Pakistan? I think it's close. I'm not going to opine because I do think it's close. But I think one thing that Pakistan has done between World Cups is they have rethought how they play 20-over cricket. Gone are the Baburs and Rizwans that are striking at 110, 115. And they've identified a set of players who might not be as famed, but players who can fill a particular role. And I think, as Anton said, we have good top order batting. We have Dawson. We've got world-class bowlers. I think we can't, having watched this tournament, Sri Lanka's full strength and even second strength bowling lineup is good enough to get you into the top 4, top 5 in the world. And I truly believe that. And we need to continue to back them and support them. And then we need to build a batting lineup that bats with intent, with aggression, as they are adjusted to circumstances, right? We're going to play in Australia and New Zealand. Think about for those spots, the 5 and the 6 spot, right? You want guys who can hit pace. That's what you're going to want. You're going to want guys who can find the boundary against pace. and try to find guys who can do it, and maybe guys on the side. Charatha Sri Lanka has shown a lot of talent for hitting pace. He's performed well in Australia. Is he a guy who can do it? But if you tell yourself, we really have 7 or 8 guys that we can pen in to that 15 right now, and all we need to do is figure out how we want to play and who's going to fill that role the best, you're already on a head start. So I believe in this team. I think Dawson, again, showed his leadership chops. I think through this next few years, he's got a key role to play in this squad. And I think we've seen you don't need to be T20 is not necessarily a young man's game. Being older and stronger and fit, that's the most important thing, right?
Yeah.
And having
experience, you can't replace experience, right?
Yep.
So moments like this, tough games and tight games, games are getting closer and closer and tighter, and all those sort of things add up to each other. That's why if you can keep your core together and build that experience, that's only going to help you make better decisions out in the field.
All right, guys. Great conversation. Let's wrap it up. Thank you, Anton, again for showing up after these games, even though some of them were a hard watch. And thanks to Nick for tuning in. We will be back sooner rather than later. We've got some women's games to talk about. We've been the Murali End. Thank you. Bye.
It's the Murali End, you're in a place to be. Analyze the players and the team. Keep a great company in the stream.
It's a Murali End. Welcome to the show. We're here when you're high. We're here when you're low. Some days you're happy, some days you wanna when happy it's we when man it's them. It's the same place, Murali End. Sri Lanka cricket we gon' represent. So tell a friend.